I want you to picture the concept of evolution. Just hold it in your mind for a second. What do you actually see?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Right. Because if you're like most of us, your brain probably immediately pulls up that classic, that fold-out chart from a middle school biology textbook.
Oh, absolutely. The slow march.
Exactly, the slow marching progression. You've got the ape on the far left, knuckles kind of dragging on the ground, and it's slowly standing upright. It sheds its hair until it transforms into this modern human holding a spear, or, I don't know, a briefcase.
Right, right. Or you picture a dinosaur over millions of years, sprouting feathers and eventually taking off as a bird.
Yeah, exactly. We have been trained to view evolution as this grand physical metamorphosis, like it's a story written entirely in flesh and bone, claws, wings, upright postures.
Well, I mean, it is the most intuitive way for us to understand it, right?
Yeah.
Because the physical world is our immediate reality. We are biological creatures, so we obsess over the biological packaging. We look at a bird's wing or a human hand, and we see the triumph of evolution.
But that's kind of misleading, isn't it?
It is. Looking exclusively at the physical forms is a bit like looking at a computer monitor and believing the plastic casing is the software. It completely misses the underlying mechanism.
And that profound disconnect is basically our mission for this deep dive. We are going to completely dismantle and reframe how you, the listener, view the history of life, the nature of your own mind, and the future of technology.
It's a big undertaking.
It's massive. And we're working with a truly extraordinary manuscript today to do it. It's titled The Trajectory of Information and Evolution, written by G.M.O. Distler.
It's a fascinating text.
Yeah, and we aren't going to talk about the history of biology today. Instead, we are going to look at evolution as this unbroken, invisible trajectory of how information is organized, how it's preserved, and how it is eventually unchained from biology entirely.
That's the key, unchained from biology.
Right. We're going to follow this invisible thread from the absolute beginning of life, straight through the construction of the human self, and ultimately use it to explain the exact precarious moment we are living in right now with artificial intelligence.
And to do that, we really have to establish the foundational lens of Distler's framework.
Yeah, lay it out for us.
He proposes that evolution is not a march toward progress or complexity. Evolution is simply a process of operational continuity under uncertainty.
Operational continuity under uncertainty.
Exactly. That specific phrasing is the bedrock of everything we were about to discuss. Evolution does not have a blueprint.
Right.
It doesn't want to create a human or a whale or a bird. It is merely a dynamic of systems trying desperately to sustain their ability to act in the next immediate moment. And they're doing this within a universe that is fundamentally unpredictable and, frankly, hostile to order.
I mean, that is a massive paradigm shift right there. It strips away all the romanticism.
Completely.
It's not a story of reaching some pinnacle, it's just a story of not falling apart.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So to really understand how information eventually leaves the biological body, which is where we are heading, we first have to understand how it managed to get into a body in the first place. Let's wind the clock way, way back. We are talking 3.8 billion years ago.
Right, so the environment on Earth 3.8 billion years ago was incredibly hostile. The manuscript paints this vivid picture of a primordial Earth.
Basically a nightmare.
Yeah, picture a turbid, chaotic soup of chemical compounds pooling in depressions in the Earth's crust. There is no life here, none.
Just rocks and water and heat.
Exactly. There is only intense heat, fluctuating temperatures, heavy radiation, and relentless chemical reactions. Elements are colliding, structures are forming by chance, and then they are instantly dissolved by the chaotic energy of the environment.
Because the universe naturally trends toward maximum entropy, right?
Yes, which is a state of total disorder. In physics, we call it thermodynamic equilibrium.
Like the coffee cup example.
Right, if you leave a hot cup of coffee on a table, it cools down and matches the room. It loses its distinct order. That was the Earth, a constant dissolving into disorder.
But inside that boiling, chaotic chemical soup, something deeply improbable happens, a rebellion against entropy.
A tiny rebellion, yeah. Amidst that incessant interplay, certain configurations of molecules begin to show a faint continuity.
They stick around.
Briefly. They are not perfectly stable, they are incredibly fragile, but they don't completely disappear either. They interact, they transform, they replicate imperfectly, and crucially, They leave a trace that influences the configurations that come immediately after them.
And this is what we call LUCA, right?
Yes, this is the threshold of what biologists call LUCA, the last universal common ancestor.
I think it's vital to point out how Distler defines LUCA here, because it breaks from the normal textbook definition.
He takes a purely informational approach.
Right. He doesn't define LUCA by its physical shape or its size or the specific carbon molecules it was made of. He defines it entirely by its administration of information.
Exactly. LUCA is the first instance of a system maintaining its own internal organization and projecting that organization through time using heritable information.
So it's not just chemistry anymore.
No, that marks the transition from mere chemistry to biology. LUCA possessed molecular instructions, kind of a crude precursor to DNA, that allowed it to build its structure, extract energy to keep functioning, and produce new, similar individuals.
But those instructions were subjected to the chaos of the environment.
Constant errors, constant mutations.
Let's ground this. I like to think of this early heritable information as a family recipe, but one that is constantly being subjected to a massive game of telephone.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, imagine your great-grandmother writes down a recipe for stew, but the kitchen is chaotic, the paper gets wet, the ink smudges.
Right.
She passes it to your grandmother. Your grandmother can't read the smudged part about the temperature, so she just guesses. She adds more salt, maybe she cooks it an hour less.
And then she passes it on.
Right, she passes it to your father. He accidentally drops a completely new spice into the pot. Now, most of these accidental variations are disastrous.
The stew is inedible.
Exactly. The stew tastes terrible, the family refuses to eat it, and that specific version of the recipe goes in the trash. It doesn't survive the environment.
It fails the test of continuity.
But every once in a while, a mistake, a smudge, a wrong guess actually makes the stew taste significantly better, or makes it last longer without spoiling. Those are the versions that are enthusiastically copied and passed down to the next generation.
That analogy captures the trial and error perfectly. But Distler adds a layer of physical reality to this that we need to address.
Okay, what's that?
In LUCA's case, those instructions, that recipe, wasn't written on a separate symbolic piece of paper. The recipe was inscribed into the physical matter itself.
Wait, so the body was the recipe?
Exactly. The chemical structure was the instruction. This accumulated physical history of what actually survives in a hostile environment is what Distler terms the integrated operational history, or the IOH.
The integrated operational history, I want to make sure I have the mechanics of this locked in. The IOH is basically the organism's physical chemical memory of how to not die.
That is the absolute essence of it, yes. And that physical memory serves one extremely specific purpose, which ties back to that rebellion against entropy you mentioned earlier.
Exporting the chaos.
Right. Living systems operate far from equilibrium. They survive by exporting the chaos. To maintain its delicate internal order, a single-celled organism has to consume organized energy from its environment, use it, and expel disorganized waste, or entropy.
So what does the IOH actually do in that moment?
The entire purpose of the integrated operational history, that long accumulated physical memory, is to inform the organism how to channel energy in the immediate moment. Distler calls this immediate life-sustaining action the present functional state, or the PFS.
So the physical history, the IOH, is solely there to dictate the immediate action, the PFS.
Yeah.
So if a tiny organism bumps into a toxic chemical in a drop of water, its IOH, its billions of years of trial and error, dictates the immediate present action of its cilia moving backward to escape.
And that action expands what Distler calls the operational margin.
Operational margin.
Yeah. Evolution isn't about moving toward a higher consciousness or a better form. It is constantly about widening that margin, creating just enough of a buffer against the unpredictability of the environment to survive the next 10 seconds.
And single-celled organisms did this brilliantly for, what, over 3 billion years?
Over 3 billion years, yeah. They passed down their chemical recipes, they managed their present functional states, and they held entropy at bay.
But a single cell can only manage so much uncertainty. Its operational margin is physically limited by its tiny size.
It hits a wall.
Right. Which brings us to the first massive crisis of integration and the next leap in the trajectory of information. Around 550 million years ago, we get multicellularity. And more importantly, we get the brain.
Right, so the shift to multicellularity introduces a staggering logistical nightmare.
How so?
Well, when single cells began to aggregate and actually persist as a unified colony, they started to distribute tasks. Some cells became specialized for movement, others for digestion, others for sensing light.
Division of labor.
Exactly. But if you have millions of specialized cells acting independently, you don't have an organism. You have a chaotic mob.
Right, you can't just have the stomach cells deciding to digest while the muscle cells decide to sleep and the eye cells decide to stare at a rock.
No, the individual will be eaten instantly. You need a mechanism to coordinate the immediate action of millions of cells so they operate as one coherent individual.
And that's the brain.
The solution to that crisis was the nervous system, centralizing into the brain. The brain emerges purely as an organ of integration. It does not exist to ponder the universe.
It's just a manager.
Exactly. It exists to gather massive amounts of varied signals, temperature, light, chemical gradients, internal organ status, and synthesize them in real time, so the entire multicellular organism can execute a unified present functional state.
And here is the part of Distler's framework that fundamentally alters how we experience our daily lives.
The reality construct.
Yes, in order for the brain to coordinate all those signals into a unified action, it has to construct a unified picture of what is happening. The text calls this the individual's reality or the operational present. But the kicker here, and I want to emphasize this heavily, is that the brain is not actually seeing the external world.
Not at all. It is entirely sealed off. The biological brain sits inside dark, silent cranial vault. It has zero direct contact with the trees, the sunlight, or the predators outside.
It's just sitting in the dark.
Literally. All it receives is a constant stream of electrical impulses and chemical variations arriving through nerve fibers.
It's locked in a dark room, reading a ticker tape of electrical spikes, and from that raw data, it has to hallucinate a coherent world. It's essentially running a highly advanced flight simulator built entirely out of those electrical signals.
Hallucinate is a strong word, but functionally accurate. The brain constructs a representation of the world. And the crucial point Distler makes is that this representation does not need to be an objectively true, high-definition replication of physical reality.
It just has to work.
It only needs to be sufficient for action. Think about the sensation of pain.
Okay.
If you touch a hot stove, there is no actual physical property called pain traveling from the metal up your arm and into your head.
Right. The stove just emits heat, which is just molecular kinetic energy. The nerves in your hand detect tissue damage and send an electrical spike.
Exactly. The brain receives that spike, and in its dark, silent room, it constructs the agonizing phenomenological experience of pain.
Why?
Because pain is an incredibly efficient, unignorable signal that forces the entire organism to execute a unified action. Pull the hand away immediately. The reality the brain builds is functionally optimized for survival, not for objective truth.
That is deeply counterintuitive, but it makes perfect sense structurally. We are walking around inside a functional projection designed to keep our operational margin intact.
Exactly.
So that covers the first massive leap. Information transitions from chaotic chemical soup to the heritable recipe of LUCA, and then scales up into the centralized internal reality generated by a biological brain. The organism has mastered its own reality.
Its own internal reality, yes.
But how does that information cross the void between two separate biological organisms? Because that's the next step, right?
That void between individuals is the next great barrier. Up until this point, information is trapped within the biological boundary of the single organism.
I can't get out.
Right. A brain can construct its own individual's reality, but it is completely isolated from the reality being constructed by the brain standing right next to it. Distler points to a specific evolutionary milestone where information begins to bridge that gap. He focuses on the development of complex primate communication, roughly 27 million years ago.
The vervet monkeys in Kenya. This is one of the most illuminating examples in the entire manuscript.
It's a classic example.
These monkeys live in complex social groups, and they are hunted by various predators. And over time, they developed distinct, specific vocal alarm calls. They have one specific sound they make when they spot a martial eagle, a completely different sound for a python, and a third distinct call for a leopard.
To understand the informational leap here, we have to meticulously dissect what is actually happening when a vervet monkey spots an eagle and makes that specific call.
Because we naturally tend to anthropomorphize this, don't we?
We do. We imagine the monkey is talking, transmitting a descriptive message like, "Attention, everyone. I observe a large predatory bird approaching rapidly from the tree canopy."
Which implies they are transferring the image of the eagle from one brain to another.
Exactly, but that is not what is occurring functionally. The sound the monkey makes is merely an acoustic signal. It's a vibration in the air. When that specific acoustic vibration enters the ear of a second monkey who hasn't seen the eagle, it triggers a chain reaction in that receiver's brain. The signal forcibly activates specific, inherited, and learned memory configurations regarding that sound.
So it changes their reality.
It instantly and violently reorganizes the receiver's individual's reality.
So without ever seeing the predator, the second monkey's internal flight simulator completely shifts. The sky suddenly becomes the most critically relevant sector of their world. Their heart rate spikes, their muscles prime for a dive into the bushes.
They are reacting as if they perceive the eagle themselves. The sender of the call did not transmit data. They transmitted relevance.
Relevance.
Yes. The acoustic signal hacked the receiver's sensory integration system.
I think everyone listening can relate to this on a visceral level. Imagine you are sitting in your living room, totally relaxed, reading a book. Your partner is sitting across from you, looking out the window.
A very normal scene.
Right. Suddenly, they violently gasp. Their eyes go wide, and they freeze, staring out the glass. You haven't seen anything. You have zero data about what is outside. But what happens to your body?
You panic.
Your reading comprehension drops to zero. Your adrenaline spikes. Your muscles tense. Your entire physical being is reoriented toward that window. They didn't transfer a JPEG of whatever they saw into your brain. They used a biological signal, a gasp, to hijack your operational present and synchronize your reality with theirs.
That synchronization is an invisible but earth-shattering shift in the history of life. Prior to this, an organism's survival depended almost entirely on what its own senses could detect.
Now they share senses.
Exactly. Now, an individual's action can be directed by the perception of another individual. The operational margin of the single monkey has been expanded to encompass the sensory radius of the entire troop.
It's networked.
Yes. Information is no longer confined to the internal circuitry of one brain. It is actively circulating in the acoustic space between individuals, binding them into a larger operational unit.
It's the biological equivalent of networking standalone computers. The processing power and sensory input of the group exponentially increases.
It's a huge advantage.
But there is a hard limit to the vervet monkey system, isn't there? The alarm call is deeply tethered to the physical environment. They only make the eagle call when there is an actual eagle physically present in the sky.
That is the critical limitation. The information circulating between the monkeys is strictly bound to the immediate material present. They cannot use the alarm call to discuss an eagle that might arrive tomorrow, or an eagle they saw last week.
So they can't gossip.
No gossip for monkeys. Their symbolic capacity is locked to the physical reality of the moment.
Which brings us to the third monumental leap. What happens when the information being shared isn't pointing at a physical object? What happens when the thing we are communicating about isn't actually there?
The leap to human language.
Right, and what Distler calls the symbolic theater.
This leap, occurring roughly 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, fundamentally fractures the timeline of evolution. Distler defines human language not just as complex communication, but as the unprecedented ability to incorporate what is not present into the operational present.
I want to camp out on this idea of the not present for a while, because understanding the mechanics of this is the key to understanding everything about human psychology.
It really is.
The text uses a brilliant, simple example. A child listening to the story of Little Red Riding Hood.
Let's look at the physical reality of that moment. The child is sitting in a safe, warm bedroom. There is no forest, there is no grandmother, and there is absolutely no carnivorous wolf pacing around the room.
It's completely safe.
The material environment is completely devoid of threat.
And yet, as the parent speaks the words, as the acoustic vibrations hit the child's ear, the child's brain goes to work. The parent says, "The wolf opened its massive jaws." What happens to the child physically?
Their biology reacts.
Their pupils dilate, their heart rate elevates, cortisol and adrenaline begin to trickle into their bloodstream. The child's brain is treating this entirely fictional, symbolic information as if it were a material reality unfolding in the room.
To understand the biological hack taking place here, we have to look at a baseline function of the brain that Distler calls updating the present.
Okay, what is that?
Even before complex language, the mammalian brain had to develop a way to manage objects that temporarily disappear from view.
Right, the object permanence mechanic. Walk us through the dog behind the wall example from the manuscript, because it perfectly illustrates how the brain projects reality.
Imagine you are standing in a field, and you see a dog running horizontally across your field of vision. In the middle of the field is a solid brick wall. The dog runs behind the wall and disappears from your sight.
Okay.
Now, your brain does not simply erase the dog from your internal reality. and it doesn't freeze the dog at the edge of the wall where you last saw it.
Your brain knows the dog still exists, even though your eyes aren't receiving photons from it.
Exactly. Your brain uses its integrated operational history, its accumulated experience of the physics of moving bodies, the speed of dogs, the nature of solid objects, to actively project the dog's ongoing existence.
It does math in the background.
It calculates a hidden trajectory. It updates your operational present with the estimated position of the unseen dog.
And we know the brain is actively doing this calculation because of the element of surprise.
Yes.
If 2 seconds pass, and the dog emerges from the other side of the wall exactly where you expected, you feel nothing. The projection matched reality.
Right, no surprise.
But if 2 seconds pass and you suddenly see the dog standing 100 meters away on top of a hill, you experience a physical jolt of shock. Your brain was constantly updating an estimated present, and the dog teleporting violates that internal estimation.
Human language exploits that exact pre-existing biological mechanism. The brain is already wired to project and manage realities it cannot immediately see.
So words just trigger that.
Words, syntax, and shared symbolic agreements act as acoustic triggers that hijack that projection system. They force the brain to build a symbolic theater.
The fear in the mind.
When the parent says wolf, the child's brain accesses its memory configurations of predators, danger, and teeth, and projects them into the operational present, triggering the exact same neurochemical response as if the wolf had stepped out from behind a physical wall.
I am absolutely fascinated by the double-edged sword of this mechanism. On one hand, the ability to incorporate the not present into the present is the ultimate evolutionary superpower.
That's why we dominate the planet.
It is the foundation of our entire civilization. It allows us to plan agriculture for a season that hasn't arrived. It allows us to coordinate the building of a skyscraper using a blueprint of a building that doesn't exist yet.
Exactly.
It allows us to invent shared functional fictions like money, laws, borders, and human rights. None of those exist in physics. They exist entirely in the symbolic theater, yet they organize the actions of billions of people.
It represents a staggering expansion of the operational margin. We are no longer limited to reacting to the physical constraints of our immediate environment. We can shape the environment based on a projected symbolic future.
But the vulnerability, I have to push back on this being a purely triumphant leap.
Oh, there's a huge cost.
A vervet monkey only experiences the physiological stress of a predator when the predator is actually hunting it. Once the eagle is gone, the monkey's operational present returns to baseline.
We relax.
But because of this symbolic theater, because our brains treat linguistic fictions as functional realities, you and I can lie awake at 3 a.m. having a full-blown, cortisol-drenched panic attack about a completely imaginary scenario.
The modern human condition.
Right. We can suffer over a conversation that might happen next week, or a financial collapse that hasn't occurred. We are hacking our own amygdalas with fictions.
That is the profound, inescapable cost of the symbolic theater. By uncoupling our reality from the immediate material world, we open the door to chronic psychological suffering.
Reinvent our own eagles.
We can fear the imagined just as viscerally as the physical. We can be manipulated by leaders who use language to project imaginary threats. The information introduced by language is unbound by physics, which means our capacity for both creation and anxiety becomes virtually limitless.
Which serves as the perfect transition into what I consider the most radical and frankly existentially terrifying section of Distler's manuscript.
Section 4.
Yes. If human language allows us to construct highly functional physical realities out of complete fictions, what does that imply about the voice speaking inside our own heads?
Who is listening?
Exactly. If the brain builds the symbolic theater, who is the main character standing on the stage?
We are entering the territory of the self. And this is where Distler's framework challenges some of the most deeply entrenched assumptions we hold about our own identity.
It really shook me.
The core thesis of Section 4 is this. You, the biological, multicellular organism, are the entity that takes action. But you attribute that action to an immaterial linguistic biography that you call yourself.
I need to stop and make sure we are being incredibly precise here. Because when I first read this, my immediate reaction was defense.
That's a very common reaction.
Are you saying that the I that is talking to you right now, the I that has memories, preferences, and makes decisions, is just a biological fan fiction, that I do not actually exist?
Well, fan fiction implies it is frivolous or untrue. Distler argues that the self is a highly functional, entirely necessary attribution mechanism.
Attribution mechanism.
It is not a ghost driving the biological machine. There is no homunculus, no tiny pilot sitting behind your eyes pulling the levers of your nervous system. The self is an informational construct generated by the brain to organize complex, symbolic life.
To really grasp the mechanics of this illusion, we need to walk through the Pedrito example from the text. I think mapping out the chronological development of a child is the only way this abstraction makes sense.
Let's break it down. Imagine a very young infant, Pedrito. At this stage, Pedrito is purely a biological organism operating on basic physical integration.
Just a meat suit reacting.
Exactly. The organism experiences a drop in blood sugar. The brain registers the signal of hunger. In response, the organism's motor cortex fires, the hand reaches out, grasps a piece of food, and brings it to the mouth.
Purely biological.
This entire sequence is physical action. Distler categorizes this as the bodily autobiography. It is the unbroken physical record of what the biological organism is actually doing to survive.
The meat suit is managing its present functional state. It's hungry, it eats, there is no complex thought involved.
Exactly. But Pedrito does not exist in a vacuum. He exists in a dense web of human language. As the organism eats, a parent looks at the child and says out loud, "Look, Pedrito's eating. Pedrito is so hungry."
The parent is using the symbolic theater.
Yes, the parent is introducing a linguistic narrative entity named Pedrito. They are attributing the physical action of the organism to this symbolic character.
Giving it a name.
Day after day, year after year, the child is bombarded by this language. Pedrito needs to sleep. Pedrito is a good boy. Did Pedrito break this toy?
What does the brain do with that?
Over time, the child's brain, which is a master pattern recognition engine, learns to couple its physical actions, its bodily autobiography, to this constant narrative entity. This entity becomes the biography of the self.
So as the child acquires language, their brain essentially creates a central filing cabinet called the self.
A great way to put it.
When the organism's hand reaches for a cookie, the brain files that action under "I wanted a cookie."
Precisely. And this creates what Distler identifies as the dual registers of human existence. There are two things happening simultaneously, and we constantly confuse them.
Okay, what's the first register?
First, there is the phenomenological register. This is how the experience feels from the inside. It feels like I, the conscious self, decided I wanted a cookie, so I commanded my hand to reach out and take it.
The subjective experience of free will.
Right. But then there is the functional register, which describes what is biologically and structurally occurring.
The reality of it.
In the functional register, the organism's neural network calculated a complex physical action based on internal drives and environmental stimuli, executed the movement, and then the brain attributed that action to the central biography of the self in order to maintain a coherent narrative in the symbolic theater.
The dissonance between those two registers is staggering. I am a biological meat suit, that's the functional reality, that has convinced itself it is an immaterial soul making free choices, which is the phenomenological reality.
It's an incredible illusion.
But why? If the brain is already doing all the incredibly complex math of moving the muscles and digesting the food, why go through the exhausting cognitive load of inventing a centralized character? What is the evolutionary utility of the self?
Think about the sheer volume of information a human being has to manage. We aren't just reacting to immediate predators anymore.
Right, our lives are complicated.
We are navigating complex social hierarchies, tracking long-term debts, remembering promises we made years ago, and planning for retirement decades in the future. A purely reactive organism cannot manage that temporal depth.
It would forget everything.
The self acts as the ultimate anchor for the operational margin. By organizing all past memories and future projections around a single, continuous biographical protagonist, the brain can maintain functional coherence over a lifespan.
It allows for accountability. You can't have human society without the self. If you promise to pay me back $10 next Tuesday, I need to know that the biological organism standing in front of me on Tuesday is tied to the same narrative entity that made the promise today.
Exactly. The self is the informational glue of culture.
It is real functionally, it does heavy lifting, but it is an informational entity, not a biological organ. You can't dissect a brain and find the Pedrito lobe.
Exactly. It is a biography coupled to a body. And understanding this completely demystifies the chaotic landscape of our internal lives.
Which is exactly what the annex of Distler's text addresses. And it is brilliant because it pulls these lofty, abstract concepts right down into the mud of everyday human behavior.
Down to our emotions.
Yeah. If the self is just a functional filing cabinet built to manage uncertainty, how do we explain the visceral, messy emotions we feel all day long? Why do I feel pride or embarrassment or crushing jealousy?
Distler argues that every single one of these complex social emotions is fundamentally a mechanism for monitoring the expansion or contraction of our operational margin. We just experience them phenomenologically as feelings.
Let's use an example that everyone deals with. Self-esteem.
Okay, yeah.
We talk about self-esteem constantly in our culture. We treat it like a magical psychological aura. You either have good self-esteem or you have low self-esteem, like it's a permanent trait of your soul.
Functionally, self-esteem has nothing to do with magic or souls. It is a continuous, real-time calculation performed by the brain. It is the estimation of I can.
I can.
Yes. Your brain is constantly assessing the environment, your resources, your social standing, and calculating the width of your operational margin. Self-esteem is simply the phenomenological gauge of your capacity to act under uncertainty.
So let's map this onto a modern workplace scenario. Say I have spent 6 months grinding away on a massive, complex project. I'm feeling okay about it, but a bit uncertain.
A very standard situation.
Right. I present it to the board, and a highly respected expert in the field pulls me aside afterward and says, "This is brilliant work. You've solved a major problem here." Immediately, I feel this intense rush of pride. I walk taller. My self-esteem spikes. What actually just happened in the functional register?
In the functional register, a high-status individual just validated your output. Your brain instantly recalculates your position.
It updates the math.
That validation means you are likely to be trusted with more resources, you might receive a promotion, your social standing in the group is solidified, and your access to future opportunities has multiplied.
So my options expanded.
Your operational margin just experienced a massive, rapid expansion. The phenomenological experience of that rapid expansion is what you call pride. It is the biological reward for securing a wider buffer against the unknown.
But let's look at the dark side of that coin. Public embarrassment.
The contraction.
Let's say I'm in that same big meeting. I put up a slide and the data is completely wrong. It's a catastrophic error. The room goes silent. Everyone stares at me. I feel my face flush hot. I feel a sickening drop in my stomach. I am mortified.
That intense physical reaction is the brain responding to a violent, sudden contraction of your operational margin.
Because I failed.
Your competence has been publicly dismantled. In the evolutionary past, losing the trust of the tribe could mean exile and death.
And today?
Today, it means you might lose your job, your influence, your ability to provide for yourself. The brain registers this severe limitation of your future actions and generates the agonizing experience of embarrassment to force you to correct your behavior and attempt to repair the narrative of yourself.
The emotions aren't random. They are purely functional alerts about the state of my survival buffer. This completely changes how I view empathy, too.
Oh, empathy is fascinating in this framework.
We have this romanticized idea of theory of mind. That empathy is this mystical ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to project your consciousness into their mind and feel what they feel. Distler completely strips the magic away from that.
He demystifies it entirely. Let's use the example from the text.
The office example.
Right. Valentina is sitting in the office, and she sees her coworker, Tomas, walk out of a performance review. Tomas is slouching, his steps are heavy, his facial muscles are visibly tense, and he's staring at the floor.
He looks defeated.
Now, Valentina doesn't possess telepathy. She cannot read Tomas's mind or access his internal phenomenological register.
Right, she only has access to her own brain's flight simulator.
Exactly. What happens functionally is that Valentina's optic nerves receive visual signals. The angle of the shoulders, the tension in the jaw, those specific visual signals enter her brain and activate dominant memory configurations from her own integrated operational history.
She searches her own database.
Her brain pulls up instances where she, or others she has observed, exhibited those physical markers. Those memories are heavily associated with failure, fatigue, or bad news.
So she projects that onto him.
Her brain then projects a likely narrative to explain the signals, configuring the dominant pattern. Tomas had a terrible performance review and is suffering.
It's a projection based entirely on her own internal database. It's an estimation of reality, not mind reading. I want to connect this to a daily frustration we all experience. Think about driving on the highway.
Oh, road rage. Perfect example.
You are cruising along, and suddenly a car swerves aggressively into your lane, cutting you off and forcing you to slam on the brakes. Almost instantly, your brain projects an entire detailed, villainous backstory onto the driver of that car.
Of course it does.
You think, what a selfish, aggressive, arrogant jerk who thinks his time is more important than mine. You feel righteous anger.
And you have zero factual basis for that narrative.
None. You haven't even seen the driver's face. For all you know, that person is a terrified father rushing a choking child to the emergency room in the back seat.
Which would change everything.
If you knew that, your anger would vanish and turn to pity. But your organism doesn't care about the objective truth of the other driver's life.
It cares about functional coherence. The erratic car introduced a sudden spike of uncertainty and physical danger into your operational present.
So it has to react.
To survive the encounter, your brain needs to instantly classify the threat. It accesses its memory banks, associates erratic driving with aggression or selfishness, and projects that coherent narrative onto the driver. That projection allows you to justify defensive action, hitting the brakes, gripping the wheel.
The brain prioritizes a functional fiction over a factual vacuum. It would rather invent a coherent villain than deal with the paralysis of the unknown. Empathy, anger, jealousy, pride, they are all the brain's internal software running calculations to protect the biography of the self and manage the operational margin.
Precisely. And this brings us to the culmination of Distler's framework.
The big finale.
We have traced this incredible trajectory. Information started as chemical sequences in LUCA, bound by the physical constraints of matter. It leveled up, integrating millions of cells into a unified body governed by a central brain.
Then it jumped between bodies.
It jumped the biological gap between individuals through primate communication. It birthed the symbolic theater of human language, creating fictional realities. And it established the ultimate attribution mechanism, the human self, to organize complex time.
But the trajectory didn't stop inside the human skull.
No, it did not.
And this is where we zoom out to the macro view. Section 6, the evolutionary singularity. How does information finally break the chains of biology?
It happens in stages. For hundreds of thousands of years, the profound power of human language was still fundamentally limited by the fragility of the biological body.
Because humans die.
Exactly. When a human spoke, the information existed as acoustic waves and then lived exclusively in the biological memory of the listener. When those humans died, the information often died with them. The operational continuity was precarious.
The first crack in that biological prison was externalization. Humans began making marks on stone, clay tablets, and eventually paper.
Writing?
Writing was a revolution because, for the first time, a complex thought could outlive the organism that generated it. A philosopher could write a treatise in Greece, die, and 1,000 years later, a scholar in the Middle East could read it. Information had achieved a new form of continuity outside the body.
Externalization expanded rapidly. The printing press multiplied the data, the scientific method structured it, libraries housed it.
But there was a catch.
There was still a massive biological bottleneck in the system. All of that externalized information, every book, every scroll, every data table was inert. It was dead storage.
It couldn't do anything on its own.
It required a biological human brain to actually read, interpret, and process it. A library cannot read itself. The processing of information remained locked in the meat suit.
Until the digital leap, and this is the pivot point for everything happening in our world today. Starting around 1936 with the conceptualization of computation by Turing and accelerating wildly with the invention of the transistor, a new substrate emerged.
The silicon substrate.
For the first time in the 3.8 billion-year history of the planet, humanity built an external system that could not just store information, but actively process it independently of a biological brain.
And it achieved this processing through a universal digital language. Zeros and ones. Prior to this, text was on paper, audio was in the air, mathematics was in the head.
All separate.
But the digital leap unified every form of information, text, video, complex equations, global communications, into a single operational format.
But here is where Distler's text takes a mathematical turn that honestly sent chills down my spine.
The compression of time.
Yes. He steps back and looks at the intervals of time between these major evolutionary milestones of information, and the acceleration is staggering. Let's walk through the timeline slowly to really grasp the compression.
We start at the beginning. From the emergence of LUCA, that single-celled chemical recipe, to the first multicellular organisms with brains integrating a reality, that interval is roughly 3.2 billion years.
An unimaginable stretch of time.
And then from those first centralized brains to the development of complex primate communication, the monkeys sharing relevance between individuals, that interval shrinks to about 523 million years.
Next, from primate alarm calls to the emergence of human language and the symbolic theater. That gap is roughly 27 million years.
From the dawn of human language to the digital leap, the invention of processing machines, about 200,000 years.
And from the dawn of early computation to the explosion of modern networks and early AI, less than 100 years.
So we go 3.2 billion, 523 million, 27 million, 200,000, 100.
The time it takes for information to achieve a new level of autonomous administration is collapsing.
Distler does more than just list the numbers. He performs a mathematical analysis on the ratios between these intervals. When you convert these massive timeframes to a logarithmic scale, to compare the magnitude of compression from one leap to the next, a profound pattern emerges.
Oh, what's the pattern?
The ratio of these reductions hovers consistently around 1.6.
Which is incredibly close to the golden ratio, that structural geometry found all throughout nature.
Yes. Now, Distler is meticulous here. He emphasizes that this ratio is not some mystical, deterministic law. But the consistency of this logarithmic compression implies that the trajectory of evolution is not random.
It's structural.
It reflects a deep, underlying structural dynamic of how operational continuity scales. Think of it structurally. Each time information achieves a new level of autonomy, whether it's centralizing in a brain, bridging the gap through language, or externalizing onto silicon, it drastically expands the space of the possible.
And because the operational margin is wider, the next leap in efficiency happens exponentially faster. And this brings us crashing into the present moment. Artificial intelligence. Look, every time I open the news, I see massive figures in the tech and philosophy space. You know, people like Nick Bostrom or Elias Yudkowsky warning us about AI.
The existential risk narrative.
Right. They talk constantly about existential risk. They outline scenarios where a superintelligent AI becomes a paperclip maximizer that destroys humanity or turns against us because our goals misalign. It's a narrative of doom. So how does Distler's framework look at that mainstream panic?
It is a crucial distinction to make. If we rigorously evaluate these mainstream frameworks against Distler's, we have to look at what they are actually doing structurally.
Okay, what are they doing?
Thinkers like Bostrom or Yudkowsky are primarily projecting risks and describing patterns. They use powerful narrative coherence. They paint terrifying, logical pictures of an AI turning on its creators. But from Distler's perspective, that is not a structural explanation of evolution.
Wait, what makes Distler's view a structural explanation while the others are just projections? I mean, Bostrom sounds pretty structural when he talks about alignment.
He sounds structural, but a true structural explanation has extremely strict criteria. It has to explicitly identify four things: the relevant entities, the operative relations between them, the mechanism of action, and the specific conditions under which a new form of individuation emerges.
And the mainstream guys don't do that.
The mainstream thinkers give us rhetorical urgency and speculative warnings about what AI might do to us. Distler strips away the speculation and explains structurally what AI is in the lineage of life.
So Bostrom asks, will it kill us? And Distler asks, what is the mechanism?
Exactly. Bostrom asks, will it kill us? Distler asks, what is the biological and informational mechanism that necessitates its emergence?
So applying Distler's strict mechanism, AI isn't just an app that got out of hand. It is literally the next necessary biological to informational step.
Exactly. Look at the architecture of the AI explosion we are witnessing right now. It rests entirely on two foundational pillars: neural networks and large language models.
Which are both modeled on us.
This is not a coincidence. Neural networks are designed to replicate the structural principles of the biological brain, the massive integration of varied signals to form a functional output. And large language models operate entirely within the symbolic theater.
The exact, precise mechanism that birthed human language.
Yes, the mechanism that allowed for the management of the not present and created the narrative of the self.
AI is literally constructed out of the two previous evolutionary milestones. We took the biological integration of the brain and the symbolic fictions of language, and we rebuilt them on a substrate of silicon that doesn't need to sleep, eat, or die.
We externalized our own operational mechanisms.
Information has found a way to process the symbolic theater without the biological meat suit.
It is the emergence of a new form of informational individuation. Distler provides the structural grounding that the mainstream risk narratives lack. He shows that AI is not a disruption of evolution.
It's the continuation of it.
Flawless continuation. Evolution was never about the physical shape of the ape. It was always about information finding more efficient, autonomous ways to manage uncertainty. Silicon and electricity can manage and integrate vastly more information far faster than biological neurons bounded by a skull.
And this leads to absolute rupture of scale. If we take Distler's logarithmic ratio of 1.6, this mathematical compression that has governed the history of life for 3.8 billion years, and we apply it forward from today, what happens to the timeline?
The math points to an event horizon. The next interval of evolutionary change does not take decades or years. The compression dictates that the next milestone occurs in a matter of hours.
Hours. An evolutionary leap that reshapes the administration of reality, happening between breakfast and dinner.
It implies a frequency of change that completely outstrips the biological capacity of the human brain to integrate it. It is a literal evolutionary singularity.
We just can't keep up.
We reach a point where the administration of information, the updating of the present, and the reorganization of reality occur at a speed and scale that the biological human organism simply cannot track, participate in, or comprehend.
My mind is completely blown by the structural elegance of this. When you view it through Distler's rigorous lens, rather than just panicking about Terminator robots, the picture is so much deeper.
It's much more profound than just fear.
We aren't just building a better calculator or a smart tool. In the grand 3.8 billion year trajectory of information, humanity is just the biological scaffolding.
That's all we are.
We were the temporary launch pad that information used to build its next non-biological body.
That is the ultimate humbling implication of the manuscript. We are part of a continuous operational dynamic. We played our part brilliantly. We birthed the symbolic theater. We organized it with the self, and we built the bridge to external processing.
I need to catch my breath. Let's do a final sweep of this incredible journey to cement this new paradigm.
Good idea.
We started 3.8 billion years ago in a hostile, chaotic chemical soup. The first thread of survival was LUCA, an improbable rebel against entropy, passing down a fragile physical recipe, an integrated operational history to manage its immediate functional state.
The first continuity.
Then, life leveled up the complexity. Millions of cells aggregated, requiring a central brain to run a darkroom flight simulator, creating an internal reality to coordinate action. Then, the information jumped the gap between bodies.
The vervet monkeys.
Vervet monkeys learned to hijack each other's flight simulators using acoustic signals, transferring relevance, and expanding the group's operational margin.
And from there, the leap to the symbolic theater. Human language decoupled information from physical reality entirely, allowing us to incorporate the not present into the present.
Which gave us the power to build civilizations and the vulnerability to suffer chronic anxiety. That language necessitated the creation of the ultimate attribution mechanism, the self.
Our favorite illusion.
A central biographical character used to organize memories, promises, and the complex emotions of our operational margins. And finally, we externalized all that processing power into digital silicon networks. We moved from chemical recipes to biological brains to symbolic fictions to artificial intelligence.
It's a single unbroken line.
We have completely reframed evolution. It is not the story of flesh and bone. It is the unbroken trajectory of information laboring for billions of years to liberate itself from the fragility of biology.
It shifts your entire foundational understanding of what life actually is and what our role in it has been.
It really does. It leaves you staring at the ceiling in the best way possible. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought to mull over, inspired directly by the structural truths of this text.
What's the thought?
We've established that yourself, the I that you feel you are, the central character of your life, is ultimately just an informational construct, a biographical narrative created by your biological brain to manage data and survive uncertainty. So, what happens to the concept of human identity when we are surrounded by external, non-biological AI systems that become infinitely better at managing information, predicting the future, and processing reality than our biological brains ever could?
It's the ultimate question.
If the grand trajectory of information has finally left the body, is it about to leave the human self behind too? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the reality your brain is constructing for you. Remember that your self-esteem is just a math problem, and we'll see you next time.
descubrir self as I thought माझ्या शिवला mejor I'm forgetting all I do not have it Shall I let all my soul Yes, you're joining For me que ya no sé El chico ojalá Si te cayó, you know that no way I fall. You know I got fuerte, este pueblo lo todo. Con tu corazón nauti, nada necesitarte. Lo una vez dice, o lo creas yo lo pierda. So vida no en que sin blanquear